Now I know what some of you might be thinking right now. Shouldn't I be uploading a Kronos Command premium deck profile right now? The answer is technically yes, as I promised that yesterday, but I already addressed this on Twitter. Follow me on twitter.com/MrTimeleap, where I'm going to delay this video till tomorrow because I'm still changing the list here and there, and I also want to use actual cards to showcase you guys more easily what the combos are and how the deck actually properly functions. But I'm missing certain cards, so I have to make some proxies, and that will mean I need to take more time. But I do have another special video for you guys, because today we're going to finally take a look at one of the two new encounter ride lines that came from set 2, as today we're going to take a look at the new Old Dragon of the Apocalypse. Stand up! Vanguard! Dragonic Overlord returns to Overdress to spread the flames of the apocalypse once more. Overlord does what he does best, and that's pressuring the opponent with a powerful restanding Vanguard. And with his support line filled with Bahr, Nahalem, Gojo and Berserk Dragon makes Overlord a powerhouse to be reckoned with. As you would expect, the Overlord's deck main ace is the demonic dragon himself, Dragonic Overlord. He's all about pressuring the opponent with big on-hit effects, and his plus engine revolves around destroying his opponent's resources. This does, however, leaves Overlord a bit vulnerable in his lack of resources, but he can make that up for it with the help of Bahr and Nahalem. Overlord's first ability allows him to negate the option for your opponent to call Guardians whenever he attacks into a rearguard. This allows him to capitalize on all the various unhit effects that Dragon Empire has access to, but the true value lies in the synergy with his main effect, as Overlord's second effect allows him to restand himself whenever he hits an opponent's unit. This, combined with his negate effect on the rearguard attacks, allows him to capitalize on his restand turn after turn while destroying your opponent's resources without actually depleting Overlord's own resources. One of the main units that Overlord has access to is Berserk Dragon. This grid 2 allows us to not only have a solid 15k beater that can turn into a 23k column, but it is also a nice option to clear the board of other units. So it, together with Dragonic Overlord's aggressive rearguard attacks, allows you to deplete your opponent's resource on a very consistent basis. Another great tool to remove your opponent's resources and units on the board is Crossrock Dragon. In the off chance that your opponent is trying to counterplay against your strategy and only call rearguards to the back row, this is a great way to pull them up to the front row and then allows Dragonic Overlord to attack into those rearguards to still enable that restand effect. And it's a nice way to also get rid of pesky Vanguard boosters, which are typically safe behind the Vanguard, but not in the face of Crossrock Dragon. Another interesting option to capitalize on Dragonic Overlord's effects is Penetrate Dragon Tribash. This grade 3, which is typically known as a Eugene support card, interesting enough, actually works really well with Dragonic Overlord. Together with Berserk Dragon, we can clear the field quite nicely, thus allowing us to use this effect on a relatively consistent basis. But what's nice about this card is that it gives our Vanguard an extra critical the moment that we are going to attack into the Vanguard, but on top of it, it generates soul, which we can actually use with Nahalem to empower Nahalem as well as Overlord at the same time. So this card can be a really nice option if you want to fill in some extra tech slots. Now, with Bahr being a thing in Overlord, we can use our Grid 1 lineup as a good toolbox engine, and with that allow us to play multiple different Grid 1s in the deck without sacrificing the consistency. And we do have a couple of great options for the deck in general, one of those cards being Stealth Dragon Togachirashi. This Grid 1 is basically a discard fodder that allows to fill the soul. With Overlord being a thing that allows us to discard a card for its cost, we can use this card almost every single turn of the game. And in the early game, we can even use it as a discard fodder for the right line. And as soon as it generates soul, it also synergizes really nicely with Nahalem, which then once again empowers our board. So this can be a great way to generate the resources we need. Another card that synergizes nicely with Overlord, but this time in a different way, is Dragonmon Gojo. This is a great way to compensate for the count charge cost that comes with Overlord as well as Berserk Dragon, and the restriction that you need to hit is actually not that tough to deal with, because you can use it as a Vanguard booster and then just attack into a rearguard, and as soon as they cannot guard thanks to Overlord's effect, you can get this effect on a very consistent basis. And then the final card that I want to highlight is once again a card with an on-hit effect, this time being Stealth Dragon Tensha Stead. This is also a nice card to allow us to get consistent access to our persona right. Once again, it generates soul just as we saw in the Overdress variant, but in this case the soul allows us to use Nahalem on a consistent basis, and it makes our restand attacks and multi-attacks even more devastating because they come with extra power. And with that extra power, sometimes allow us to just attack into the Vanguard if we know they don't have a perfect guard, and we can potentially break through and restand their Vanguard to attack twice into their Vanguard. Now, as for the ride line for Dragonic Overlord, we basically only have one solid option, and that is the actual Dragonic Overlord ride line with Bahr, Nahalem, and Overlord. The reason why this ride line is so good for Overlord is that on turn 2, the moment you ride on top of Bahr, you can search out any of your grade 1s, and as we already discussed, we can search out our Perfect Guard, we can search out Togachirashi for Discard Fodder that can also generate our soul, we can search out Gojo for our turn 3 countercharger, or Tensha Stead if we want to have that persona ride for next turn. Then the next turn when we ride Overlord onto Nahalem, we get Nahalem onto the board, which gives us an actual attacker without dedicating cards from our hand. But on top of that, that exact same Nahalem can use its skill to Soulless 1 to turn that Nahalem into a 15k and turn our Overlord into an 18k without any boosters on the board. So this allows us to get value every single turn in the first couple of turns of the game. And for a deck as Overlord that doesn't really have an inherent draw engine or a plus engine, this is really good to at least get your feet on the ground and start running right out the gate. The trigger lineup for Overlord is an interesting thing because you actually have a lot of different options. Now, as already stated multiple times in this video, Overlord doesn't really have an inherent draw engine except of the ride line itself. So that means we do have a lot of value by running multiple draws. But with the new front triggers giving us 20k shield, that's also a really good asset to have, as that at least ups the value of every single card, meaning even though we have less draw power, just the sheer fact that our card value is higher than general means that we at least compensate for the lack of draw power. And with the fact that Overlord can restand and has multiple drive checks, running crits is actually also effective, as that means the moment we attack into our opponent's Vanguard, it's more likely that we attack with multiple crits, meaning the pressure is a lot higher than you would expect. So with that said, we do have a couple of options for trigger lines. One of those being 4 heals, 4 crits, 3 draws, and 4 of the new front triggers, including the over trigger. This is just a very solid trigger line that covers every single basis of what we need, but we can also put more emphasis on other aspects. We can up the amount of draws and crits, so we lose the fronts and then we can go for 6 crits and 6 draws to just get more of the draw value, or we can just go for 3 extra crits and replace the fronts with draws. As stated, you can experiment which trigger you want to run, because in this particular build, the trigger lineup is very flexible and it all comes down to your personal preference. For my personal Dragonic Overlord list, I play this particular variant. Now, as you can see, we run the entire Dragonic Overlord core with Overlord, Nahalem, Bahr, as well as Berserk Dragon and Dragonmon Gojo at 4 copies. But we do see a couple of tech options thrown in there. We see 3 copies of Togachirashi, only 1 copy of Tensha Stead, and 2 copies of Tribash, and the 3 copies of Crossrock Dragon. Now, the reason why I chose these cards is that Tribash gives me that extra crit pressure in the right circumstances where I can clear the board, or I can punish my opponent when they're not dedicating enough cards to the board. And it also fuels my Nahalem, which then allows me to keep the high numbers on a consistent basis. Crossrock Dragon is once again a card that punishes my opponent if they try to counter my strategy, as I can now pull their back row units to the front row. And Tensha Stead is here for the persona ride in general. Now, the reason why I personally chose to run 4 Gojos and only 1 Tensha Stead has to do with the fact that I'm mainly relying on Overlord's counterblast ability and Berserk Dragon counterblast ability. The idea is to use those skills every single turn, which wastes 2 counterblast. That is not sustainable in the long run, so that's why I want Dragonmon Gojo to at least refund 1 counterblast every single turn. That then also means I have less room to play with Tensha Stead, as that's yet another counterblast on top of it, and ideally to make that card as effective as possible, I need to put it behind the Vanguard. But Gojo is also a Vanguard booster, so I have only 1 place for each of these cards every single turn. That's why I only opt to run 1 Tensha Stead, as I can always search it out with Bahr in the early game if I feel like that in this current matchup I will get more value of getting that at least 1 extra persona ride off. And as you can see, I run the generic all cover trigger lineup with the 3 draws, 4 front, and the 4 crit and 4 heals, because I feel like I want to be a bit more flexible and I can see the benefit in all types of triggers in this particular deck. Now, one thing I haven't really covered all too much in this particular build is the power numbers that you can generate. The reason why I haven't really touched upon it is that the columns themselves don't really generate special numbers. Like, we have 8k boosters and then we have our 15k grade 2s, and that means we can generate 23k columns. The only difference here is that Bahr can potentially be in 5k on top of it. So if we can put a Bahr behind either Nahalam, which is 15k, or a Berserk Dragon, which attacks for 15k, then we can make a 28k column. But besides that, you probably most likely will generate 23k columns every single turn, and potentially that can be another 10k on top of it if we Persona Ride on top of everything else. The only card that doesn't really fit into this idea is Togachirashi because it's a 7k, but you're never going to call that card to the field. At least that's not the ideal situation. You want to discard it either for the right line or for Dragonic Overlord's restand ability. Overall, this deck is relatively standardized in the likes of what cards you actually are going to run, but that said, there are actually some options you can think about, because as I already stated, the Tribash, the Crossrock Dragon, and the Tensha Stead are basically my tech choices, which already implies there are other options to be had. And that's definitely the case, because you can replace these cards with other options. In the likes of Crossrock Dragon and Tribash, you do have other cards to experiment with. You have multiple 15k beaters that Dragon Empire has access to, so if you want more 15k beaters, you can opt to run those. Or if you like the argument for the front triggers, that being that you want to increase the value of every single card, thus the lack of draw potential in the deck is compensated for the fact that every single draw is a lot better than on average, then you can opt to run the Blitz Order Burn Bright Pure Prayers, as it's overall much higher shield value than most cards, so that allows you to at least be a bit more defensive and lasting to the late game. Now, in terms of the grade 1 lineup, this can basically change to your personal preference, as you have the Search Engine with Bahr, so you at least can guarantee one of the grade 1s that you're running, so you can run off 1-offs on 2-offs. But besides that, you can go around whatever card you preference more if you want to run more copies of that, and you can also look at other grade 1s to slot them in your particular grade 1 lineup. A good possible option is Blaze Fist Monk Enten. This is a nice card that can also benefit from the unhit abilities of Dragonic Overlord, and it can empower your Overlord with another 10k if you want to be very aggressive, so this is also a card that you can look out for. And that basically sums everything up for Dragonic Overlord in Overdress. Now, the overall information density is kind of low, because most of the cards within Dragon Empire doesn't really work all too well with Dragonic Overlord right now, because we have a lot of cards tailored toward the Overdress mechanic. That said, however, because Dragonic Overlord is very generic in usage and it allows you to get that hit pressure on a consistent basis, I can definitely see Overlord getting more generic support with set 3 and set 4 on the horizon, and that can definitely mean that the deck itself will evolve in the coming months. So don't write the deck off just yet, because even now, it's still actually pretty solid, because you need to keep in mind, you do come with 2 Vanguard attacks every single turn, and even though one of them goes into the rearguards, you still do get the extra drive checks. So if you like the pressure and you've always been a fan of Dragonic Overlord, or you now want to give the Dragon of the Apocalypse a spin in Overdress, definitely try to get your hands on these cards and try the deck out for yourself. But with that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/FrankTheInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/FrankTheInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!